Picture this. It's a chilly November morning. You're finishing up a mug of steaming hot coffee, gazing out at your garden, which is finally settling down for its winter rest. You're left with those coffee grounds in your hand, and a popular piece of online advice pops into your head. Don't toss those. They make amazing fertilizer. Your hand instinctively moves to dump them right under your beloved roses or hydrangeas. But wait! Are you absolutely sure you're doing your plants a favour? What if I told you that this simple act, done right now in November, might not just be useless, but could actually poison your plants and ruin your soil for the entire growing season to come? In today's video, we are going to dissect one of the most persistent gardening myths. You are about to uncover the shocking truth about why coffee grounds in late fall transform from a potential ally into your garden's real enemy. Stick around until the end, and you'll see how one tiny mistake could cost you your future harvest and the overall health of your plants. Let's start by understanding where this massive belief in the magical powers of coffee grounds even comes from. In recent years, we've all been leaning toward conscious consumption, zero waste practices, and, naturally, organic gardening. The idea of taking food waste and turning it into a valuable resource for your garden sounds incredibly appealing. The internet is flooded with articles and short videos showing smiling bloggers easily fertilizing everything with their leftover morning brew. It's marketed as an easy, free, and eco-friendly way to feed your plants. And, to a certain extent, that's true. Coffee grounds do contain beneficial elements. But, as the saying goes, the devil is in the details. And in gardening, those crucial details involve seasonality, temperature, soil condition, and the specific needs of individual plants. These are the very details that most popular advice overlooks, effectively turning a generally useful product into a real problem, especially when we talk about applying it in the cold months like November. So, let's start with the central myth, the one that forms the foundation of this whole belief. The common understanding is that used coffee grounds are a readily available source of nitrogen, the element crucial for plant growth. That sounds logical enough. After all, nitrogen is highlighted as the key element in every agronomy textbook. But here's the crucial catch. The nitrogen found in fresh grounds is present in an organic or locked up form. Plants simply cannot absorb it directly. To make this nitrogen available, the grounds must first undergo a process of decomposition, commonly called mineralization. And who performs this essential task? That would be the microscopic workforce of our soil, the bacteria and fungi. They have to digest the organic material and release the nutrients into a form that plant roots can actually absorb. This entire process requires specific conditions, the most important of which is heat. If you sprinkle grounds on your soil in November, you're essentially handing your plants a vault full of food, but forgetting to give them the key to open it. And this key, as we will discuss shortly, isn't just missing during colder months. It can actually be used against the plants themselves. Let's take a closer look at what makes up those coffee grounds. What exactly is lurking inside, besides that hard-to-access nitrogen? The composition is actually quite rich. They contain phosphorus, potassium, magnesium, copper, and other essential trace elements. It's truly a potent mix of nutrients. However, along with the good stuff, the grounds also retain other substances, such as chlorogenic acids and, naturally, residual caffeine. It's important to note that the ratio of these elements is far from what you'd find in a perfectly balanced fertilizer. But the central issue isn't the composition itself, it's the nutrient availability and the potential side effects. For instance, fresh coffee grounds are acidic. Their pH level typically ranges between 5.5 and 6.8. For a few specific plants, this might be beneficial, but for the majority, it causes stress. When you spread grounds onto cold, dormant soil, these acids won't neutralize as quickly as they do in the summer. This can locally, but severely, alter the chemical balance right at the roots of your prized plants. It's essentially like giving a person healthy food, but in a form their stomach can't digest. Let's dive deeper into nitrogen, the tricky, two-faced Janus of the gardening world. As we've established, coffee grounds contain nitrogen, but it's locked up or bound. To free it up, soil microorganisms need to put in serious work. Here's the catch. To perform this function and sustain themselves, the microbes require nitrogen too, specifically in an easily accessible mineral form. This brings us to a fascinating phenomenon that agronomists call nitrogen drawdown or nitrogen immobilization. When you incorporate a large amount of fresh, high-carbon organic material, like coffee grounds, into cold soil, the briefly awakening microbes immediately start the decomposition process. This process requires significant energy, which they gain by pulling the already available nitrogen reserves out of the soil. In other words, instead of delivering nitrogen to your plants, the coffee grounds, or rather, their decomposition process, begin stealing it from your existing soil bank. Plants, which may already be in a dormant state, are stripped of the last readily available scraps of nutrition. It creates a paradox. You apply what you think is a nitrogen source, yet you end up inducing a nitrogen deficiency in your plants. This is especially dangerous for young or already weakened plants. Let's talk about the main factor here, November. What happens to the soil during this month? Simply put, the ground gets cold. In most regions, soil temperatures plunge below 10 or even 5 degrees Celsius. Biological activity in the soil practically grinds to a halt. Microorganisms, our tiny little helpers, go into a state of anabiosis, or simply put, they begin their winter dormancy. They don't die, but their metabolism slows down dramatically, by tens, sometimes hundreds of times. The process of organic matter decomposition, which takes mere weeks in the summer, stretches out over many months in the fall and winter, or completely stops until spring temperatures return. This is why, when you dump coffee grounds onto the cold November soil, you are essentially just preserving them until spring. There is absolutely no real-time fertilization happening. The grounds simply sit there, on the surface, or in the top layer, as dead weight, just waiting for their moment. And during this long wait, they can actually cause quite a few problems, which we will discuss right now. It's like putting perishable food into a refrigerator that's been unplugged. It won't preserve anything. It will just start to rot. Let's take a moment to picture these soil microbes. They are an enormous army numbering in the billions: bacteria, fungi, and actinomycetes. During the summer, when the soil is warm and moist, they function like a perfectly coordinated processing plant for organic waste. They consume dead roots, fallen leaves, and yes, even your coffee grounds, turning all of it into valuable humus and accessible nutrients. But the moment the soil temperature drops below 41 degrees Fahrenheit, 5 degrees Celsius, this whole operation grinds to a halt. The workers effectively go on vacation until spring. Your coffee grounds, rich in carbon and acids, are left lying there unsupervised. They aren't processed. They don't integrate into the soil structure. They simply sit there like a foreign object. On rare, slightly warmer days, some of the hardiest microbes might try to start the job, but they won't have the capacity for a full decomposition process. They'll only nibble at the grounds, pulling the last available remnants of nitrogen out of the surrounding soil, and then promptly go dormant again. The result is not a benefit, but rather a ticking time bomb, a delayed problem that will fully reveal itself when spring arrives. We've already touched upon nitrogen robbing. Let's dive deeper into this mechanism, because it is absolutely key to understanding the process. The carbon to nitrogen ratio, or CN, is the single most important metric for any organic material. For coffee grounds, this ratio is roughly 20 to 1. That means for every 20 parts of carbon, there is only 1 part of nitrogen. For microbes to break things down quickly and efficiently, they ideally need a ratio closer to 30 to 1. At first glance, this might not seem like a huge problem, but here's the catch. The carbon in the coffee grounds is highly accessible, while the nitrogen is not. To process all this readily available carbon, microorganisms desperately need easily obtainable nitrogen, which the grounds themselves simply don't provide, so they start looking for it elsewhere. in the soil. They literally vacuum up the mineral nitrogen that was earmarked for your plants. In the summer, when biological activity is high, this effect is temporary. Microbes multiply quickly, they die, and the nitrogen is returned back to the soil. However, in a cold November, this process becomes one-sided. The microbes grab the nitrogen, but they don't release it back, because their life cycle is dramatically slowed down. The result is that by spring, when your plants wake up and desperately need nitrogen for a strong start, they will find a nitrogen-starved desert around their roots. Let's turn our attention now to soil acidity. This parameter is absolutely crucial for the health of your plants. Most garden crops prefer neutral or slightly acidic soil, with a pH ranging from 6 to 7. Fresh coffee grounds, as we remember, are highly acidic. If you incorporate them during the summer into biologically active soil, that acid effect is quickly managed. Soil buffer systems, microbial action, and natural rainwater rapidly bring the pH back to normal. But come November, things change dramatically. The soil is dormant, rainfall decreases, and moisture often arrives as snow. The acid you introduce stays concentrated in the upper soil layers. It isn't neutralized and it isn't leached out. Over the long winter, under the snow, this residual acidity can seriously and permanently alter the chemical makeup of the soil in the root zone. For plants that are sensitive to pH changes, this can be fatal. Come springtime, they simply won't be able to absorb the necessary elements from that soil, even if those nutrients are physically present. This is known as nutrient lockout. The plant essentially starves while sitting in abundance, solely because the chemical environment prevents it from accessing the food source. So, which plants will be the first casualties of this autumn acidification? First and foremost, the calciphiles, plants that prefer alkaline or neutral soil. Classic examples include clematis, lavender, and most stone fruit trees, such as cherry or plum. Even a slight shift in pH toward the acidic side causes them intense stress. Their root systems become impaired, making them far more vulnerable to disease. Garden vegetables like cabbage, beets, and onions also thrive in neutral soil. If you've spread this material onto your garden beds while preparing them for next season, come spring, you might find your seedlings are weak and stunted, or fail to sprout entirely. Even roses, which usually tolerate slight acidity, won't appreciate such a sudden and ill-timed shift in chemical balance right before they head into winter dormancy. You had the best intentions, but you've ultimately created unbearable conditions for your plant's spring growth, effectively laying a chemical time bomb right beneath their roots. But wait, an experienced gardener might object. Some plants actually thrive in acidic soil, and they would be completely correct. Hydrangeas, rhododendrons, azaleas, blueberries, and conifers, these are all examples of plants that flourish in acidic conditions. It might seem like applying coffee grounds in November would be the perfect gift for them. But even in this case, things aren't quite that simple. While the extra acidity won't hurt, all the other negative factors still apply. First off, the issue of nitrogen drawdown still affects these plants. When spring arrives and they need readily available nitrogen for vigorous growth, the coffee grounds will steal it away. Secondly, there's another major issue we'll discuss later: physical soil compaction. Even for acid-loving species, a crusted layer of coffee grounds on the surface can cause far more problems than any benefit derived from the acidification. Moreover, applying any type of fertilizer or feeding material in November is generally counterproductive. Plants are already preparing for dormancy. Their metabolism is slowing down, making any kind of stimulation at this time inappropriate. It's much better to use specialized fall fertilizers in September or early October and save the major soil acidification treatments for the spring when the plant is actively growing and ready to utilize those changes. Let's look at the mechanics of what happens. Coffee grounds are made up of very fine particles. When you spread them on the soil surface, especially in a thick layer, here's what occurs. After the first rain or thaw, these particles bind together and form a dense, virtually impenetrable crust. It's very similar to the way mud or silt cracks and dries up at the bottom of a dried-out puddle. This crust acts as a genuine barrier between the soil and the atmosphere. It blocks not only water, but critically air circulation as well. Plant roots need oxygen to breathe just as much as we do, but underneath this coffee shell, gas exchange completely stops. The soil essentially suffocates. This danger is amplified during winter thaws. When snow melts, the resulting water can't penetrate the soil because of the crust. As a result, the plant roots end up sitting in cold, oxygen-deprived water, leading directly to root rot and eventual plant death. Come spring, you might discover that your perfectly healthy, overwintered plant has suddenly died, and the culprit will be that seemingly harmless application of coffee grounds. We're still on the topic of soil suffocation. This dense crust of coffee grounds poses a significant threat, not only to existing plants but especially to future seedlings. If you've covered a patch with grounds where you plan to sow spring seeds, like carrots or parsley, you've created an almost insurmountable barrier. Tender young sprouts will find it extremely difficult to push through this dense, matted layer, and your seed germination rates could plummet dramatically. Moreover, this crust interferes with the normal function of earthworms and other beneficial soil dwellers that maintain aeration and soil structure. The worms simply cannot process such a thick layer, causing them to retreat deeper, thereby depriving the topsoil of their beneficial tunnels and nutrient-rich castings. The net result is that instead of improving the soil structure, like real organic matter or compost would, you actually make it worse. You are taking rich, fluffy, living earth and turning it into a dense, lifeless mass, which will take significant time and effort to restore. What about caffeine then? A lot of people assume that since caffeine gives humans a boost, it must act like an energy drink for plants too. That couldn't be further from the truth. In the plant world, caffeine works completely differently. It's actually an allelopathic chemical. To put it simply, this is a compound that certain plants release to suppress the growth of their competitors. The coffee tree uses caffeine precisely for this purpose, to prevent anything from growing beneath its canopy and stealing its water or vital nutrients. While there isn't a huge amount of caffeine left in used coffee grounds, the remaining concentration can still be potent enough to significantly slow or even completely halt seed germination and the development of young seedlings. This process is known as the inhibition effect. When you dump grounds onto your garden bed, you are essentially treating the soil with a low-concentration natural herbicide. For a mature, strong plant, the effects might be negligible, but for young sprouts or freshly sown seeds, this can be a death sentence. The idea of trying to perk up your plants with a little coffee is truly one of the most damaging misconceptions in gardening. But there's yet another unfortunate side effect we need to consider. The damp, nutrient-rich, organic mass resting on the surface of cold soil is an ideal environment for the development of various molds and pathogenic fungi. In the summer, exposure to the sun causes the material to dry out quickly, so this problem is less pressing. But during wet and cold months like November, it can remain soggy for weeks. All sorts of molds happily settle there, ranging from harmless green varieties to the much less welcome grey rot. These fungi don't just look unsightly, they can spread to the lower parts of your plant's stems, causing rot and decay. Perennials that overwinter with a crown of leaves, such as strawberries or heucheras, are especially vulnerable. A layer of mouldy material sitting right around the plant's crown or root neck is almost a guaranteed way to lose the plant over the winter. You are essentially creating the perfect disease incubator right at the base of your plants. Instead of providing benefit, you end up with a breeding ground for infection that will begin its destructive work the moment the spring thaw arrives. Beyond microscopic fungi, your coffee grounds amendment can lure in larger, unwelcome visitors. The scent of decomposing organic matter can be highly appealing to certain pests looking for a place to overwinter or a convenient food source. For instance, that miniature compost pile can become home to the larvae of fungus gnats or sciarid flies. While these pests are usually more damaging to houseplants, you certainly don't want them establishing themselves in your garden beds. Furthermore, the moist, dense environment created by a thick layer of grounds is an ideal winter haven for slugs and their eggs. Come spring, as soon as the weather warms up, you'll have an entire army of hungry pests hatching right near the roots of your most vulnerable plants. There's also anecdotal evidence suggesting that the smell of coffee may attract rodents. While the grounds aren't their primary food source, rooting around for sustenance, they can easily disturb your garden beds and damage delicate plant roots. So, in trying to tackle one minor problem, a perceived nutrient deficiency, you risk inviting a whole host of very real pests into your garden. So, are coffee grounds the ultimate enemy that should be thrown away instantly? Absolutely not. They are still an incredibly valuable organic resource. We simply need to learn how to use them correctly. The safest, most effective, and frankly, best way to utilize them is through composting. Instead of scattering the grounds directly onto your soil or garden beds, put them straight into your compost pile or bin. There, mixed with other organic waste, they'll undergo all the necessary decomposition stages under controlled conditions. When in the compost, all the potential downsides of coffee grounds are actually turned into benefits. Their acidity will be naturally balanced out by other, more alkaline components in the mix. Their naturally dense structure will be aerated and broken up by coarser materials, like dried leaves or straw. The nitrogen contained within them will be slowly and correctly released, accumulating properly within the finished compost. Crucially, the composting process itself will destroy any potential pathogens and weed seeds. The result is not a problematic waste product, but a premium, perfectly balanced, living fertilizer. Rich humus. This will truly improve your soil structure and nourish your plants effectively, without any negative side effects whatsoever. Let's quickly break down how to properly compost your coffee grounds. Successful composting relies on balancing the so-called green and brown materials. Greens are the nitrogen-rich components. These include grass clippings, food scraps, and of course, our coffee grounds. Browns, on the other hand, are the carbon-rich materials, dry leaves, straw, sawdust, cardboard, and paper. The ideal ratio is roughly 1 part greens to 2 or 3 parts browns. So, whenever you toss a container of coffee grounds into the bin, make sure you layer it with 2 or 3 volumes of dry autumn leaves. This ensures the proper structure of the compost pile. It won't clump up and will remain well aerated. This balanced approach guarantees that the microorganisms receive the nutrients they need, working efficiently to transform your waste into black gold for the garden. By next spring, or in about a year, you'll be able to enrich your soil with finished, safe, and incredibly beneficial compost, all thanks to the important role your coffee grounds played. But are there any exceptions to this rule? Can coffee grounds be used in the garden in November at all? To put it simply, if you absolutely insist on doing it, then yes you can, but only with massive reservations and warnings. The only relatively safe method is to use them as a very light, almost powdery layer of mulch on empty vegetable beds, keeping them well away from any perennial plants. This layer must be incredibly thin, just 1 or 2 millimeters thick, so it absolutely does not create a solid crust. After application, you must lightly incorporate the grounds into the topsoil using a rake, thoroughly mixing them with the dirt. This step prevents caking and helps speed up their integration into the soil come spring. However, even following these strict guidelines, the benefit of doing this procedure in November is virtually zero, and the minimal risks still remain. Frankly, the effort just isn't worth it. You will bring far more value to your garden by simply tossing those spent grounds into your compost bin. This is a classic case where the best is the enemy of the good. A simple, tried and true solution is always far more effective than engaging in questionable gardening experiments. If you don't have a compost pile and you're stuck with leftover coffee grounds, there's a much better alternative for using them in November: your houseplants. Unlike your outdoor garden, your home is always warm. This means the microorganisms living in your potted plants are fully active and capable of breaking down a small amount of organic material. However, there are still rules to follow. Never apply the grounds in a thick layer directly onto the surface of the potting soil. Doing so will only lead to the same issues you encounter outdoors, such as mold and persistent fungus gnats. The best method is to mix a small amount of thoroughly dried coffee grounds directly into the primary potting mix when you repot your plants. Alternatively, you can create a liquid feed. Just soak a small amount of grounds in water for a couple of days and use that resulting coffee tea to water your plants. However, only use this infusion infrequently, perhaps once every month or 6 weeks, and only for plants that prefer acidic soil, like azaleas or African violets. For most other common indoor plants, this type of feeding will do more harm than good. Let's wrap up by tackling one final popular myth about spent coffee grounds. It's often touted as a fantastic deterrent for slugs and snails. The theory goes that the abrasive texture injures their delicate bodies, while the caffeine scares them off. In reality, however, the results are extremely poor. To create a truly insurmountable barrier for a slug, you would need an impossibly wide and thick layer of dry grounds. But as soon as the grounds get wet from rain or dew, a constant occurrence in our climate, they lose all their abrasive qualities and cease to pose any threat whatsoever to the pests. Furthermore, as we've already discussed, moist grounds actually create the exact, comfortable, damp environment these pests thrive in. Regarding the caffeine content, yes, it is toxic to them in high concentrations. However, in spent grounds, the concentration is far too low to provide any serious repellent effect. Therefore, relying on coffee grounds as an effective method of slug control is unfortunately a waste of time. There are far more reliable and proven methods available to combat these garden nuisances. So let's deliver the final verdict. What actually happens if you apply coffee grounds to your soil in November? In the best case scenario, nothing will happen at all. They'll simply sit there, inert, until spring. In the worst, and far more likely, scenario, you'll face a whole host of problems. You risk triggering nitrogen depletion in your plants, acidifying the soil, and creating a dense, airtight crust on the surface that prevents roots from breathing and absorbing water. You also risk creating the perfect conditions for mold and pathogenic fungi to develop, while simultaneously inviting unwanted pests into your garden. The benefit from this kind of fertilizer during the cold season is essentially zero, while the potential harm is quite significant. Coffee grounds are not a fertilizer in the true sense of the word. They are an organic material that must go through a proper composting process before they become truly beneficial to the soil and the plants. And November is absolutely the worst time to introduce fresh, unprocessed organic matter into your garden. So what's the main takeaway from all of this? The most important secret to successful gardening isn't just about what we use, but when and how we apply it. Coffee grounds are a perfect example of how a valuable resource, used incorrectly or mistimed, can turn from a benefit into a drawback, or even a poison. Remember this simple truth. During the cold season, especially around November, the soil is dormant. The best thing we can do is leave it alone. Don't disturb it, and certainly don't try to force feed it something it can't digest. Instead of dumping the grounds directly around your shrubs, send them to the compost heap. That's where they belong. In the warm, moist heart of the compost pile, they'll undergo their magical transformation and become a truly valuable and safe fertilizer, perfectly timed for the new season. Thank you so much for watching this video all the way through. I hope you found this helpful and that it saves your garden from these subtle yet very serious mistakes. If you enjoyed this debunking, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our next gardening investigation. Now, I have a question for you. What other popular gardening tips or hacks have you questioned lately? Share your thoughts and stories in the comments below. Let's discuss them together.